Hello. We live in a very exciting moment of our time. We live in a world where self-driving cars are not science fiction anymore, where we don't need to fly an airplane, or we don't even need a worker to run a factory. All of these can already be made by robots. Robots are now taking us to a new industrial revolution, and this revolution will be different from the previous ones. In the next decades, automatization and robotization will completely change the way we perceive work and production. Every year, change makers and the most important people in the world, they gather in Davos, Switzerland, to discuss what are the urgent issues that we should foresee in the time we are living. In the last meeting, world leaders discussed exactly this. What are the consequences of technology? How we can perceive labor from the moment we are replacing humans for robots in factories? Why we still have so much unemployment nowadays? Recent reports alert for the huge or the increasing amount of not just unemployment, but also inequality in the way we're going to drive our societies in the next decades. That if nothing changes, then we're going to have terrible consequences. And we can still think that this is kind of a future scenario. That is science fiction and it will not happen. But it's already happening among us. We are already being controlled. Take a look at the stock market. Take a look at the air traffic control. Or every one of you, every time it uses Google, you are being controlled. The problem is, from the moment we move from the industrial sector to the service sector, we are creating consequences. The service sector is the main employee in our societies. So what happens when we move to full automatization? I can tell you already that there is a full automatized hotel. An hotel that doesn't need humans to work. It already exists. It has workers, but they are robots. It already exists, the full automatized pharmacy, the full automatized restaurant, and so on. And I believe that is this vision of replacing humans for robots, just following a capitalistic logic of profit that is creating concern among ourselves and among our societies. Because if we do it just following this capitalistic logic, then we need to rethink the value of working. And work has been all the time one of the foundations of our societies. Sometimes we even define ourselves by the work we do. I am the doctor. I am the scientist. I am the engineer. And of course, work is also a biological need. So what is the value of working in a time that machines can produce everything for us? I believe that technology in the next decades can enable what I think could be a new human. I call it the human significance. That from the moment that robots can produce everything for us, we will look, and from the moment we are released from our manufacturing tasks, from our hands, we will look for meaning in the way we produce, consume, the way we buy. So let me take you a bit into this future scenario. So here on the first tower you could see a future market where all the agriculture will be made by robots. We just need to control the quality and production, and food will not be a problem anymore. On the middle, you have the restaurant. So cooking will become a major job. And because the act of cooking is really connected to our senses, to our feelings. So it's exactly this type of details that will be enhanced in the future working conditions. Because it's here that the robot cannot be better than us, than humans. On one hand, all the jobs that will enhance on one side creativity, and on the other side, meaning. Or in this case, something that is more significant for us. The last tower is the production, or let's say the factory. So how the factory will run if the machines can produce everything for us? So I believe, for instance, the acts of coming together, acts of gamification, will become important. Just acts of reflection as well. Imagine all of these will become part of the way we're going to need to produce. So here, I started along with Erik Vlemmix, a Dutch designer, a research collaboration on Me, You, and the Robot. And Me, You, and the Robot is a research collaboration that tries to use the robot not as a tool, but as a partner in a design-related sense, and in design research. So, but before I tell you, or before we going further on how a future working space may look like, we need to do a time travel. We need to go back and understand how technology influences in the last decades. So let's go back to the 80s. Here you see the office have been cubicles, still even the computers, but everyone have his own desk. And of course, our desk in the 80s was full of tools. Then in the 90s, we will start to see that for the first time, and thanks for technology, thanks for internet and computers, we could start to work at home for the first time. So we could leave our working space to work in our own working space. And of course, if you see the desk, is now slightly more clean because the computer starts to absorb the tools that we are using in our everyday. Now, in the beginning of the century, we start to understand that maybe open spaces will be the best way and the best format to work. That we could see our colleagues, that we could talk, that the human interactions become more positive and it influences our efficiency. And of course, the desk now is slightly or even more clean. Then computers become an important tool, almost a fundamental tool. And now, nowadays, the time we are living now, with Google Office as a reference, we tend to act of acts of gamification or acts of coming together becomes a major and important role. And of course, we don't need a desk anymore. We just need our computer. We can be wherever we want. So it's exactly here that my research started. So how we can foresee, based on the previous decades, what will be the future? How will technology still influence us? How can we foresee how technology will enable us to a new format for working? So let's all imagine here. I know this is a bit utopian way of thinking, but let's imagine that for working, we just need to have a conversation. What if technology will enable us to have a conversation? Something that I believe anyone in this room can do. Everyone knows how to do. We do it all the time. We do it with our friends and with our family. We do it at our home or in a cafe. What if acts of reflection, acts of thinking in our society, how we can become better, ourselves and the people surround us? How can we use technology to bring this to life? So let me present you guidelines for the human factor. It's a project that we did last year, and what you are looking now is an algorithmic working space. So here an algorithm, or in this case a robot, plays the role of a moderator and uses the conversation between two humans in order to produce whatever we want. So how does it work? On one side, it generates text and voice to intervene. So if someone speaks more than me, he will interrupt the conversation and give the word to the other speaker. Or if you say, for instance, a bad word, then it will say this type of language is not allowed. Or if simply what we are saying is just not interesting. On another screen, it's giving us permanent references based on what you are saying. So based on Google searches, it's giving us images, references, words, based on what we are doing, on what we are saying. Sometimes it can be very close to what we are talking about, but sometimes can also foster serendipity moments, showing us references and moments that we didn't thought before, taking us to places that we didn't thought before we have seen these pictures. And of course, the entire composition, the entire working space is closed. When we see an hologram in the middle, that is in this case producing an archetype of a vase. And how does it work? Imagine that during the conversation, the algorithm is creating blocks of text. So it's trying to understand what you are saying and resuming it into a word. So what is important in this text? Are we talking about refugees? Are we talking about politics? Are we talking about nationalism? What are we talking about? From the moment he understands that the conversation is enough and that we have enough material for production, from that moment, he will stop and he will close the production. So here you see already some examples of previous performances we did back to the Netherlands. So here you see what you see here is a mirror, is a reflection, is a conversation piece. It is apt to be a reflection on what is just being happened. So in this case, objectivity, the object will show us a moment in time, like a photo. So if we think the object that surrounds us in space and time, they always represent the time we are living now. On one side by showing the technology and the aesthetics. And I believe that this is not different. But I also believe that technology, in the time we are living now, the next value will become acts of coming together, acts of social interaction. And imagine the value of this. Imagine the value of using social interactions as a way to create objects, as a way to make us around from objects. Let's give you an example. So let's imagine that, for instance, a political act could become now visible. A peace treaty could also become, or something important. Let's imagine that one day, North Korea and South Korea will get a peace treaty, and they'll become in peace. And what if we use exactly that moment, the moment of that peace treaty, to produce and use an algorithm and use technology to create an object of peace that then, yes, makes sense to be reproduced and be amplified to the world. So I envision a future working space where humans and machines work along, side by side, in mutual respect. Of course, not making the robots slaves, but making them apprentices. So I believe that we can challenge these future predictions of humans become obsolete by technology, not just by creating new ways of production, but also creating new ways of production that makes us more human than ever. Thank you so much.